Welcome to the Podcast, a podcast about podcasting from True Story FM. I'm Pete Wright.
And I'm Andy Nelson. Hi, Pete.
Hi, Andy. How are you?
I'm great. What are we talking about today?
I want to talk about a couple of things. The first thing I want to talk about is summertime. And
yes.
I want to talk about the Olympics. Are you watching the Olympics?
I know that they're happening.
You're not good at culture, global culture, is what I'm hearing you say.
I love the Olympics.
I mean, not enough to watch any of them, is what you're saying.
You know, it's just work.
Here's the thing that's interesting to me. I am watching the Olympics, and I have to say, Peacock has nailed it this year for the Olympics. Although, if you watch the opening ceremonies, you could feel it right away that the producers of the show and the Paris Olympic Committee and NBC and Peacock were very stoned in their brainstorming sessions. Like, this is an Olympic ceremony like no other. I have never experienced anything quite like this. It is possibly the most Parisian that it could possibly be. The opening ceremonies had a row of can-can dancers that didn't show up to rehearsal. Like, some of them, I think, fell. There was no unison in their can-cans at all. There was, and yet that was matched by a gorgeous building, like 17th century building, and all the windows had Marie Antoinette holding her own head, and metal music. A live band was standing on shelves that were kind of jutting out from the building, and they were playing metal music to real marionettes or Marie Antoinettes holding their own heads. I mean, it was extraordinary, and of course, Snoop Dogg is a commentator. I don't even know what to do with that information. The point is, it's crazy. I'm watching a lot of it, and the results are, for NBC and Peacock, quite promising. In fact, the numbers so far, and we're a week in, say that they've had a combined viewership of 34 million, which is extraordinary. It is the largest, including Super Bowls. It is the largest viewership of any sporting event that we have broadcast. They're doing very well, and rightfully so. They've made some crazy swings, and they're doing great, and I love it. How does that relate to podcasting, you ask?
It's a good question. I do ask.
I'm trying to map viewership of the Olympics to our downloads. How are people, like when we have big events like this, when our media attention is turned another way collectively, especially to the tune of 34 million viewers, are they listening to podcasts as much as they normally would? I don't see a lot of huge trends, but I do see some wonkiness. Like on our initial release day, normally we see a big spike on our initial release day. And this last week, we saw subdued spikes, still spikes, but subdued spikes on our initial release day. And the trending 3 to 4 days after, we had higher than normal downloads. So I look at a show and I think, okay, maybe there was something big that happened that night. Maybe it was a Katie Ledecky night and everybody was paying attention to Katie and they caught up on their downloads the next day. So I have not seen any just dumps of downloads. And sometimes we do in the summer. Historically, July, August was tough territory. And that does not seem to be the case. People are still catching up, but the data is a little bit funky, I think.
Interesting.
So, well, I don't know if it's interesting, but I guess we'll see after things pan out. What we need to get through is the next week as the Olympics end and see how things shake out. But it's something that I'm watching and I'm interested in it. The next piece is about our CPMs. Libsyn's Rick Sela, they've released the latest advertising report from Libsyn Ads, and they had some data on our current CPM rates. Are you curious at all about how podcasts are priced?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's an important part of pricing out when you're trying to get advertisers to pay for your show. So it's a very important part of the world of podcasting.
It is very, very important. In this case, it appears that summertime CPMs, the cost per mille, or a cost per thousand. So for every 1,000 downloads you get, how much, what is the rate for this advertising read? For advertisements on Libsyn, which is a sizable enough network to be statistically relevant, have remained stable. Sometimes summer shows a dip, and right now they're pretty stable. The average CPM for a 60-second spot in July was $21.90, a slight decrease from June's $21.92. Interestingly, podcasts with 10,000 to 100,000 downloads per episode boasted the highest average CPM at $23.25, though this was a small drop from $23.52 in June. Meanwhile, smaller podcasts, those with 1,000 to 10,000 downloads per episode, saw a 2% increase in their CPMs, reaching $22.30. The genre with the highest CPM continues to be technology at $30 CPMs, followed by government at 26, business at 23. And there are budget-friendly options in health and fitness, comedy, and education. Education, budget-friendly, in the high teens to low 20s. How does that hit you? How are you feeling about those rates? Do they feel grounded in reality?
I mean, yeah, I think that there's some logic to it, and based on just the conversation we were just having about the Olympics and kind of the not necessarily like the summertime dip isn't necessarily striking so much. The fact that the rates are comparable still and they're holding, I think that makes sense.
Yeah, for me, what's one of the most interesting elements to this is just how close those demographic swings are, or those download swings are, right? That we're seeing 23.25 in the 10,000 to 100,000, and 22.30 in the sub 10,000 downloads. That's pretty close. Like, those rates are pretty good, which I think shows a lot more confidence in the advertisers who are paying those rates at the viability of a podcast audience.
Yeah, it is interesting, though. A podcast that's there's a big difference between a podcast that's getting 1,000 downloads per episode versus 10,000 downloads per episode, but they're all kind of lumped into that same rate.
Yeah, that's a big range.
Yeah, it is interesting. So, but it's nice to know that they're kind of in that lump. So once you're at that point and you're getting that cost, I think that's pretty strong.
Yeah. Another interesting thing that I'm thinking about this week. So do you listen to the Daily podcast?
Not daily.
Are you trolling me right now?
I really don't listen to it daily, but I do listen to it just from time to time. I enjoy the show.
The Daily is the New York Times deep dive podcast that is released. Guess how often? I'll just leave that hanging here. And it's been very, very popular. It is in fact one of the podcasts that many of our clients refer to as a reference podcast, right? It's produced very well, easy to listen to, great interviews. Whatever you think of it, it is commonly considered a very high quality podcast. They also, New York Times, have a podcast called The Headlines. And it's a podcast that's designed to complement the Daily. So the Daily is the deep dive. The Headlines is the summary of what you need to know.
It's like a 10-minute version of the Daily. Right.
Do you listen to The Headlines?
No, I haven't listened to that one because that's a newer one. They haven't been doing it that long, have they? Or am I totally wrong on that?
Well, May of 2023. So not that long. But still, Daily, that's a lot of episodes.
Right.
Yeah.
No. Yeah, I've listened to the Daily. I've not delved into the Headlines.
Let me ask you this. One of the reasons that some people may not have listened to the Headlines is because it only exists inside the New York Times audio app. Are you a fan of the New York Times audio app?
That's probably why I haven't listened to it.
Yeah. And that has been my problem, too, is that the New York Times went all in on this audio app a few years back and put all of their content in the audio app. Some of their podcasts, like The Daily, also live in regular podcast directories, but some of it is gated subscriber access only. The news is, as of late last week, that they are going to be releasing The Headlines as its own standalone podcast app. I've been trying to figure out if we can make an assessment
as its own podcast app, or
Andy, I think you've known me long enough to realize that you should pay attention to what I'm thinking and not what I'm saying. No, they are releasing the headlines in podcast apps.
Yeah.
Not just like a feed in your
Right.
podcast apps, not just gated behind the New York Times app.
Right.
All right. I've been trying to find something that tells me, is the New York Times audio app successful? Because you know me, I'm super pro open podcasting. I hate gated communities. I hate them. And the moment the New York Times audio app came out, I said to my wife, well, I'm never going to listen to anything there, like just on principle. And so that's just my bent. If some of their things are legitimately gated for subscribers, but there are ways to put subscriber contented regular podcast apps too, and they just chose to create this app. What I wanted was some indicator that moving this very popular daily show into the public podcasting sphere was somehow an indictment that creating their own podcast app did not work as well as they thought it was. I have not necessarily found that. I have found an editorial response that says, look, the New York Times audio app is for a very specific subset of New York Times subscribers. It has received over 1 million downloads. That says something. But how many people for whom it is a first screen phone app? How many people are listening to it, listening to podcasts or New York Times audio there explicitly every day? That I have not been able to find. So a lot of dubious industry folks on how popular it is, but nothing to say it's a failure by any stretch. I think anytime you have a popular podcast moving out from behind the gate into the public podcast space is a good thing. Good thing. So New York Times is kind of a controversial property these days, and yet I think this is a good move.
Yeah, I mean, some of it, I think they treat it like a membership. Like, I mean, we have memberships for some of our podcasts. Like, I mean, you can get the episodes of This American Life on the New York Times app. It's just a day early, right? And so we get those same episodes that they get on the app. They're just getting it early. So some of that makes sense in that membership capacity, but in other ways, I do wonder, how many other ways it's being used and to what extent.
Right. Well, a great example is the Wondery app. Wondery, the podcast network, I believe owned by Amazon, is they actually have an app, the Wondery Plus app, and you can download the Wondery Plus app. And if you're a subscriber to podcasts on Wondery Plus, you can get those in the app. They want you to download the app because they get data from you when you are listening in the app. However, every single podcast on Wondery Plus, the member-supported podcasts, are available and accessible in your podcast player of choice as well. Yeah. So that I think is the perfect model, right? You can have an app all you want, but for those who are real podcast fans who have their own behavior, I think it's important to sort of meet them where they are and not force them into some other app experience. And I think that's what I'm interested in seeing, what's happening. We're seeing it at Spotify. We're seeing this sort of decentralization at Spotify. More and more Spotify exclusives are starting to come outside the gate. And I think this is why. I think it's because it turns out listeners don't follow podcasts to gates in as high a number as they had initially assumed. So we're learning. And, I'm interested in seeing how this data changes over time.
Yeah, you really got to be a hardcore fan to just all the steps that it takes. And it's not that many steps, but in your head, it suddenly becomes a list of things. Well, now I got to go to find the link so I can go to it. I got to go to the App Store and download it and sign in and create an account and enter my credit card information, like all those different steps. And it's just like, it might be worth it, but you just got to be aware that there is a wall there.
Yeah, there's a wall there. Just personally, what are you using to listen to podcasts right now?
I've been using Apple's podcast app.
Yeah, but you were doing that kind of on a dare, right?
Well, I was, and I still am. I mean, I was largely using Overcast, but because Apple Podcasts is so huge, and most people that I talk to, when I'm trying to get them to download something, they're using Apple Podcasts. I've started using it just to really understand what it is about that app that works, why people use it, I mean, it's built into your phone, so it's to some extent easiest to just jump in and use, again, just like we were saying, without having to find a new app and do research and figure out which one you want to use and all of that sort of stuff. So there are elements that do make it handy. And so I've just been playing around with that. And, we've talked about that, like what they've been doing, like integrating their auto transcript tools and things like that. There's a lot of tools in it that are, pretty handy and stuff. And so it's, also, if you're familiar already with how Apple Music works on your phone and how to set up playlists and what you want to play next and everything, it's all the exact same tools that they use in podcasts that you have. So, I mean, yeah, to that extent, it still isn't my favorite, but it's been good practice just to use it and see what it is about it that people like about it.
Well, I'm proud of you for taking that proverbial dodge. It is definitely not my favorite. Do you have a favorite feature of Apple Podcast? Is that a thing that exists?
I don't know if I have a favorite feature. I don't have a favorite.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you, so right now I switch back and forth all the time, as you can imagine. And I love that, most of them have some sort of cloud sync, so I don't have to migrate and import every single time. I'm a user of Pocket Casts right now and Overcast, the aforementioned Overcast from Marco Arment. And Pocket Cast just released a feature that, I love. And I'm a 2X guy. I listen to podcasts fast.
Yeah,
and sometimes faster. And for years, Pocket Casts went up to 3x. I could go up to 3x speed. And for slow talkers, that actually works pretty well, right? I can do that if I'm listening on headphones. But they just updated the app and now can go to 5x, Andy.
Oh my God.
That's honestly
crazy.
I can't imagine listening to a podcast at 5x, but I will fight and die for others' right to do so, Andy. I love that feature exists so much. I love that they're pushing that. Pocket Cast has some syncing, issues that people have complained about. Overcast just had its big 10-year 10-year anniversary, and with that came an entirely new, ground-up, rewritten version of the app. It looks largely the same with some new features that are a little bit different. Some things went away, some things came at. The biggest news with regard to the podcast business is there's a huge feature that Marco decided to eliminate from the latest version of the app. I would like, just so I explain it clearly, I'm just going to read a bit of what Marco says about this. So what's gone? Streaming.
Yes. Okay. Interesting.
Most big podcasts now use dynamic ad insertion, which causes bugs and problems for streaming playback. Downloading episodes completely before they begin playback is much more reliable. Tapping a now downloaded episode will now open the playback screen, download it, then start playback. It works similarly to the way the streaming did before, but playback begins after the download completes, not after a portion of it is buffered. On today's fast networks, that usually only takes a few extra seconds, and in the near future, I'll be adding smarter options and more control over selective downloading of episodes to further improve the experience for people who don't automatically download every episode. That is a really interesting thing to do right now, and it's counter industry. It's like against the way the industry is moving to remove streaming.
Yeah, it's very interesting because, I mean, there were periods, I guess, in my life where I would find a podcast and I would want it to download all the episodes because sometimes when I'm out walking the dog or something, I would hit pockets where I didn't have strong internet. And if I didn't have the downloads, then my episode would just stop until I kind of hit Wi-Fi again, And so... But I've I don't know, Wi-Fi has just the networks have grown so much and so strong that I've really not run into that problem in quite a while. And so now I don't even pay attention to that. I largely am just streaming. I assume, actually, I'm not even sure. Like, what are my settings? Is it auto downloading anyway? I don't know. But it's interesting that they're only going to be doing that.
Well, it is really interesting. So inside of Apple Podcasts and Spotify and other, there usually the default, I think, is it downloads the latest episode that comes in, and you can change that per podcast. And so the episode is ready for you when you want to press play. However, if you press play on an episode that isn't downloaded yet, it does partial downloads, like progressive downloads, and it starts playing pretty much right away. And the entire time you're listening to an episode, it's sending the data back to Apple. So you can see, as a podcaster, some interesting data. You can see how far people listen to an episode before they drop off and move on to a different episode, the general completion rate of your episodes. You can see, you get information about download behavior that you don't get with Overcast anymore, right? And somebody downloads from Overcast, all you get is the download and sort of demographic metadata, like where they are generally in the world. You don't get how much they listen. So it's kind of, from an ad metric standpoint, it's a step backward. And one, I'll say personally, I'm thrilled about, right? I love the idea that what I have in Overcast is a rock solid, playable file, because I have it set to auto download when a new episode comes out, and I never have to worry about, am I in service or out of service? I just know the episodes are kind of managed for me.
Yeah, right.
And I also kind of low-key love that it's original data, that it just says, hey, what I get is someone in this area downloaded this show. That's honestly what I need to know. And I know that people are, they're probably cursing me right now, because having more data is generally a good thing. In this case, I really think podcasting is best when we don't have islands of separate sort of data sources and metrics, and this is the purest one we have. So I'm kind of a fan of it. The app so far is a little buggy. The thing that works right now really well is the Overcast industry-leading audio engine. It is the most satisfying to listen to. He's put a lot of work into that audio engine, and that hasn't changed. But I'm having some playlist reordering issues. He's fixing bugs really, really fast. And so I have every confidence that it'll be back to normal very soon. If you are a Mac user or iOS platform user, check out Overcast, the new version, 10 years on. It's pretty cool. But
is that what it's called now?
That's the business change. No, it's just called Overcast.
Okay, not 10 years on.
No,
Overcast 10 years on.
Maybe he should change the logo. Change it into a big 10. Yeah. That would be original. So that's, I don't know. I got no more news. Do you have any other news? Anything else you're excited about?
I don't have anything else, but I mean, that's a lot of great stuff right there. I think it's exciting, just these things. It's nice to see these podcast apps growing and figuring themselves out how to work better for this industry.
Well, across the data, across an unpredictable data summer. So keep podcasting, everybody. If you want to learn more about us and what we do, head over to truestory.fm. Click on About. You can see what Andy and I do and why we do it. And call us. We'll start a podcast with you. We'd love to.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Andy.
Thanks, everybody.
This has been the Podcast, a podcast about podcasting from True Story FM. We'll see you next time.